Have you ever experienced that moment when someone you care about suddenly becomes distant? One day you're having deep conversations, sharing laughs, and connecting on a meaningful level, and then seemingly overnight, everything changes. The texts become shorter, the calls less frequent, and there's an invisible wall that wasn't there before. If you're watching this video, chances are you're going through this exact situation right now, and you're desperately trying to understand what went wrong. Today, we're going to explore this complex emotional landscape through the lens of Stoic philosophy, one of the most practical and powerful approaches to understanding human behavior and managing our responses to life's challenges. By the end of this video, you'll not only understand what her distance really means, but you'll also have the tools to respond with wisdom, strength, and inner peace. But before we dive deep into this topic, I want you to take a moment and think about Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled one of the most powerful empires in history. Despite having unlimited power and resources, he faced the same human struggles we all do. In his personal journal, which we now know as Meditations, he wrote extensively about relationships, loss, and the pain of human connection. Even emperors, it seems, had to deal with people becoming distant. The Stoics understood something profound about human nature that we often forget in our modern world obsessed with instant gratification and constant communication. They knew that trying to control other people's behavior is not only impossible, but also the source of most of our suffering. This ancient wisdom is exactly what we need when someone becomes distant, because our natural reaction is usually the opposite of what actually helps. Let's start by examining what distance actually means in the context of relationships. When someone becomes distant, our minds immediately jump to the worst-case scenarios. We think we did something wrong, that they've lost interest, or that they're seeing someone else. But the Stoics would tell us that these assumptions are often projections of our own insecurities rather than reality. Distance in relationships can mean many different things. Sometimes it's a natural response to feeling overwhelmed or needing space to process emotions. Other times it might indicate that the person is going through personal challenges that have nothing to do with you. It could be a defense mechanism triggered by past experiences, or it might simply be their way of evaluating the relationship and determining what they truly want. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who himself understood the pain of loss and separation, taught us about the dichotomy of control. He said there are things within our control and things outside our control, and wisdom lies in focusing entirely on what we can control while accepting what we cannot. When someone becomes distant, their feelings, their choices, and their actions are completely outside your control. What is within your control is how you respond, how you interpret the situation, and how you choose to grow from the experience. This is where most people make their biggest mistake. Instead of focusing on what they can control, they become consumed with trying to change the other person's behavior. They send more texts, make more calls, and become more available, thinking that increased effort will somehow bridge the gap. But this approach almost always backfires because it comes from a place of neediness and desperation rather than strength and understanding. The Stoic approach is radically different. Instead of chasing, you pause. Instead of assuming, you observe. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond thoughtfully. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means approaching the situation with the kind of wisdom that comes from understanding both human nature and your own worth. When Marcus Aurelius faced rejection or distance from others, he reminded himself that he could not control their opinions or actions, but he could control his own character and responses. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This principle is absolutely crucial when dealing with someone who has become distant. Let's explore what her distance might actually mean, beyond the surface-level interpretations that our anxious minds create. First, it might mean that she's protecting herself. Many people, especially those who have been hurt in the past, use distance as a shield. When emotions become intense or when they feel vulnerable, their instinct is to pull back and create space. This isn't necessarily about you or your relationship, it's about their own emotional survival mechanisms. Second, her distance might indicate that she's processing her feelings. Not everyone processes emotions the same way. While some people need to talk through their feelings immediately, others need time and space to understand what they're experiencing. If she's become distant, she might be taking the time she needs to figure out her own emotions before she can communicate them effectively. Third, distance can sometimes be a test, though not always a conscious one. Subconsciously, she might be observing how you respond to her pulling back. Will you become needy and desperate, or will you maintain your composure and respect her space? Your response to her distance reveals a lot about your character and emotional maturity. Fourth, her distance might reflect external pressures or life circumstances that have nothing to do with your relationship. She might be dealing with family issues, work stress, health problems, or other personal challenges that are consuming her emotional energy. In these cases, distance is not a rejection of you, but rather a natural response to being overwhelmed. The Stoics understood that our initial emotional reactions are often not based on reality, but on our interpretations of events. When someone becomes distant, our ego immediately feels threatened, and we create stories to explain their behavior. But these stories are usually more about our own fears and insecurities than about what's actually happening. This is why the Stoic practice of examining our own thoughts and assumptions is so powerful. Before you conclude that her distance means something negative about you or your relationship, ask yourself, what evidence do I actually have? Am I making assumptions based on fear rather than facts? What other explanations could there be for her behavior? The Stoics also emphasized the importance of focusing on virtue rather than outcomes. This means that your goal should not be to make her less distant, but rather to respond to the situation in a way that reflects your highest values. Are you responding with patience, understanding, and respect? Or are you responding with neediness, anxiety, and attempts to control? When you focus on virtue rather than outcomes, something interesting happens. You stop being reactive and start being intentional. You stop chasing and start attracting. You stop trying to force connection and start creating space for authentic connection to occur naturally. This brings us to one of the most counterintuitive but effective responses to distance: giving space. The Stoics understood that trying to force outcomes usually produces the opposite of what we want. When someone becomes distant, the natural impulse is to close the gap, but the wise response is often to respect the distance and use it as an opportunity for growth. Giving space doesn't mean disappearing or playing games. It means respecting her need for distance while maintaining your own sense of self-worth and purpose. It means continuing to live your life fully rather than putting everything on hold, waiting for her to return. It means being available without being needy and being interested without being obsessive. The ancient Stoics lived by the principle that we should focus on what we can control and accept what we cannot. When someone becomes distant, you cannot control their behavior, but you can control your response. You can choose to use this time for self-improvement, for pursuing your goals, and for deepening your understanding of yourself and what you want in relationships. This period of distance can actually be a gift, though it rarely feels like one at the time. It's an opportunity to examine your own patterns in relationships. Do you tend to become anxious when someone pulls away? Do you lose yourself in relationships and forget your own goals and interests? Do you tie your self-worth to other people's attention and approval? The Stoics believed that every challenge contains within it the seeds of growth and wisdom. When someone becomes distant, you have the opportunity to develop patience, self-control, and emotional resilience. You can learn to find fulfillment and happiness within yourself rather than depending on others for your emotional well-being. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. The Stoics were not emotionless robots. They were people who had learned to experience emotions without being controlled by them. You can care deeply about someone while still maintaining your emotional equilibrium when they become distant. One of the most powerful Stoic practices for dealing with distance is the discipline of perception. This involves examining how you're interpreting the situation and consciously choosing more empowering perspectives. Instead of seeing her distance as rejection, you might see it as her needing space to process her feelings. Instead of seeing it as a sign that the relationship is over, you might see it as a natural part of the relationship's evolution. The Stoics also emphasized the importance of present moment awareness. When someone becomes distant, our minds tend to either ruminate about the past or worry about the future. We replay conversations looking for clues about what went wrong, or we imagine worst-case scenarios about what might happen. But the Stoics would remind us that all we really have is this present moment, and the present moment is where our power lies. In the present moment, you can choose to focus on your own growth and well-being. You can choose to pursue activities that bring you joy and fulfillment. You can choose to strengthen other relationships in your life. You can choose to work on goals that matter to you. When you focus on the present moment and on what you can control, you stop being a victim of circumstances and start being the author of your own life. This approach has a profound effect on how others perceive you. When you respond to distance with strength and wisdom rather than neediness and anxiety, you become more attractive, not less. People are drawn to those who have their own lives, their own goals, and their own sense of purpose. They're repelled by those who seem to need them for their own emotional stability. The Stoics understood that the highest form of love is not possessive or needy, but rather generous and free. When you truly care about someone, you want what's best for them, even if that means giving them space or even letting them go. This kind of love is rare and powerful because it comes from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. As we near the end of our exploration, I want to share with you a story that illustrates these principles in action. There was once a successful businessman who had been dating a woman for several months. Things were going well until she suddenly became distant. She stopped calling as often, her texts became brief, and she seemed distracted when they were together. His first instinct was to panic. He wanted to confront her, to demand answers, to do whatever it took to get back to where they were before. But instead, he remembered the Stoic principles he had been studying. He chose to give her space while focusing on his own life and goals. He didn't withdraw completely, but he stopped trying to force connection and instead allowed it to happen naturally. After a few weeks, she reached out to him and explained that she'd been dealing with some family issues and had needed time to process her emotions. She appreciated that he had given her space without making her feel guilty or pressured. This experience actually strengthened their relationship because it showed her that he was secure enough to handle her need for independence. The key insight here is that by responding with wisdom rather than anxiety, he created space for authentic communication to occur. He didn't try to force her to open up or to change her behavior. Instead, he focused on being the kind of person who could handle whatever life threw at him, including the uncertainty of not knowing why someone had become distant. This is the power of Stoic wisdom in relationships. It's not about being cold or indifferent, but about being strong enough to love without attachment, to care without controlling, and to be present without being needy. It's about understanding that healthy relationships require two complete individuals who choose to be together, not two incomplete people who need each other to feel whole. So what should you do when she becomes distant? First, resist the urge to immediately react. Take time to process your own emotions before you respond. Second, examine your assumptions and interpretations. Are you creating stories based on fear rather than facts? Third, focus on what you can control, which is your own behavior and responses. Fourth, give her the space she seems to need while continuing to live your own life fully. Remember that distance is not always permanent or meaningful. Sometimes people need to pull back temporarily to gain perspective or to deal with other aspects of their lives. By responding with wisdom and strength, you create the best possible conditions for the relationship to evolve naturally, whatever that evolution might look like. The Stoics would remind us that we cannot control outcomes, but we can control our character and our responses. When you focus on being the best version of yourself, regardless of how others behave, you not only improve your own life, but also become more attractive to others. You become someone who adds value to relationships, rather than someone who drains energy from them. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more content on Stoic philosophy and practical wisdom for modern life. Remember, the goal is not to manipulate or control others, but to develop the wisdom and strength to handle whatever life brings your way. When you master yourself, you become truly free, and that freedom is the foundation of all healthy relationships. Until next time, remember the words of Marcus Aurelius. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Focus on what you can control, let go of what you cannot, and trust that wisdom and virtue will guide you toward the relationships and life experiences that are truly meant for you.